sound the alarm. If fortune was on your side, you'd spent the night wedged awkwardly in a tree fork, banking on the idea that predators weren't fans of bark-flavored breakfast. Less lucky mornings found you sprawled on open ground, your bed being a few scattered leaves or a small mound of dirt. Privacy? Forget it. Everyone in your little clan, and the occasional wanderer from a neighboring band, slept close for warmth and for the hope of safety. Rolling over could mean meeting your cousin's unblinking eyes, a beetle the size of your thumb, or worse, undeniable evidence that last night's berries had waged war on someone's stomach. The first ritual of the day was listening. The wild was never truly quiet. Every sound carried a message. Birds calling meant daylight, and maybe breakfast. Insects buzzing meant you'd avoided freezing to death. Heavy, deliberate footsteps in the brush, that was your cue to already be halfway up the nearest tree. Standing up took courage. You had no idea what the dark hours had delivered. A lion lounging nearby, a python soaking in the sun, or fresh droppings that screamed something big was here just minutes ago. Once you knew you weren't about to become someone's meal, you looked for your group. They were your life insurance. Lone wanderers didn't last long, about as much chance as a half-cooked fish in a crocodile's pond. There was no mirror to check how you looked, and even if there had been, it wouldn't have helped. Your hair was a tangle of leaves, your skin painted with streaks of dirt, and the only makeup was yesterday's smear of berry juice or pollen. Still, you were breathing. The sun had risen, and in that moment, you'd already achieved the most important task of the day, existing. The rest of the day would be far less forgiving, water to track down, food to scavenge, and shelter to secure before the sun slipped away again. But for now, in this rare and fleeting moment, you could savor the quiet luxury of simply not being dead. If waking up was victory number 1, then finding breakfast was victory number 2, and that one demanded more than just blind luck. In the prehistoric world, there were no menus, recipes, or best before dates. Breakfast fell into 3 loose categories: plants, animals, and mysterious items you prayed were edible. The menu was decided entirely by chance. Maybe you stumbled upon a fig tree sagging under the weight of ripe fruit, or a shrub peppered with berries that looked harmless, though no one could clearly recall whether the last brave soul who tried them had lived to tell the tale. Without field guides or scientific names, early humans relied on trial-and-error botany. If something made your lips tingle, you stopped eating. If it made your vision swim, you really stopped eating. Protein was the real challenge. A determined soul might shinny up a tree in search of bird eggs. Fragile, rich, and fiercely protected by feathered parents with sharp, unforgiving beaks. If fortune smiled, you might spot a sun-warmed lizard. Easy enough to eat raw when fire was still an invention for the far-off future, though you'd chew cautiously to dodge teeth and bones. And then there was the gamble of found meat, a half-eaten carcass abandoned by something bigger and hungrier than you. Free protein, yes, but also a pressing question. Was its former owner still close enough to reclaim it? In moments like these, eating quickly wasn't advice. It was survival protocol. A slow breakfast was an invitation to become breakfast. Water often doubled as the morning meal, too. A few muddy gulps from a shallow stream might take the edge off hunger, though the side effects ranged from mild dysentery to full-blown hallucinations. Still, when the alternative was starvation, you drank, telling yourself the gritty flavor was just part of the recipe. No plates, no utensils, no napkins. Meals happened standing, crouching, or moving at a brisk pace because staying in one spot too long meant advertising your location to anything higher on the food chain. By the time the last mouthful slid down, your stomach might still be grumbling, but your odds of living through the day had ticked upward, and in the prehistoric world, that was the only rating that mattered. Water itself was easy to find. Safe water, on the other hand, was practically a myth. Every glittering river, pond, and stream shimmered with the promise of life while hiding a microscopic army of parasites, bacteria, and hitchhiking creatures eager to make your insides their permanent address. But thirst was a faster killer than hunger, so pickiness wasn't an option. A rain puddle could save you. So could a shallow creek, though it might also serve as a crocodile's drive-through window. The math was brutal. Drink now and maybe suffer later, or don't drink and definitely suffer sooner. Of course, there was a ritual to it. Charging up to the water's edge and dipping your face in was a rookie mistake, usually followed by a brief and educational death. First, you watched. Ripples that didn't come from the wind, shadows lurking just beneath the surface. These were the warning signs. If things looked calm, you'd creep forward, crouch low, and drink fast, ready to sprint if the water decided to lunge back. Some groups got creative. Drinking from cupped hands kept you farther from danger. A narrow bend in the river offered a better view of any unwanted guests approaching. And if luck smiled on you, you might discover a hidden rock pool, separated from the main current, a prehistoric luxury bath, if you could ignore the layer of dead insects floating on top. There was no boiling, no filtering, no purifying. Clear water was probably fine. Murky water? You drank it anyway and told yourself that the earthy aftertaste was part of the charm. Sometimes those desperate gulps led to nothing worse than a gritty aftertaste. Other times they bought you days of stomach cramps, dizziness, or worse. But comfort wasn't part of the prehistoric bargain. Survival was. You played the odds one sip at a time. Each drink was a roll of the dice. Maybe you'd walk away refreshed, maybe nauseated, or maybe you wouldn't walk away at all. Still, water was life. And in those days, life almost always came with hidden teeth. Fashion, if you could call it that, followed a similar philosophy, practical by accident and never by design. Your outfit was whatever had stuck to you overnight. A night on the forest floor might leave you wearing a patchwork of crushed grass, dirt, and mystery substances that passed for camouflage, if your goal was blending in with a compost heap. Waking up in a tree wasn't much better. Bark fragments and stubborn leaves had a way of clinging. Animal skin cloaks? Not yet. Woven fabrics? Still millions of years in the future. Your primary layer was your own skin, occasionally accessorized with a strip of fur from a recent kill, if you were lucky enough to have one, and frequently garnished with the insects treating you like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Seasonal changes were handled with the most advanced technology available, walking. If it got cold, you moved toward the sun. If it was too hot, you sought shade. If it rained, you got wet. Complaining about soggy clothes wasn't an option, mostly because there weren't any clothes to soak. Cleanliness was equally theoretical. Bathing meant wading into a river and letting the current handle the heavy lifting. Within minutes of leaving the water, you'd be dusted in pollen, coated with dirt, or dripping with the pulp of whatever fruit had burst in your hands. Occasionally, decoration entered the picture, not for modesty, but for intimidation, amusement, or sheer curiosity. Smears of clay could help keep biting insects at bay, though they also gave you the look of a startled statue caught mid-thought. Smearing crushed berries across your skin left streaks of deep red or purple, perhaps a mark of beauty, or maybe just evidence that you'd lost a brawl with a particularly juicy shrub. Footwear wasn't a concept yet. Instead, your soles built up calluses thick enough to rival stone tools, though a sharp rock could still make even the most seasoned hunter hop and curse like they'd stepped on a prehistoric Lego. And yet, without fabrics, fasteners, or even a passing nod to modesty, people somehow managed not to freeze in droves during the cold or collapse in the heat. The dress code was as minimal as it was practical. Wear whatever the environment stuck to you, and hope it didn't bite. Security worked on the same principle. Everyone was part of the neighborhood watch, whether they liked it or not. With no fences, locked doors, or beware of dog signs, your only defense against predators was spotting them before they spotted you. Unfortunately, predators were everywhere. Some stalked in daylight, some in darkness, and some simply lingered until you made a mistake. Big cats crouched invisibly in tall grass, revealing themselves only in the final heartbeat before impact. Hyenas traveled in laughing packs that made you suspect they already knew how the chase would end. Snakes didn't bother pursuing. You'd come to them eventually, usually by putting your foot exactly where it shouldn't go. There was no official alarm system unless you counted the group's collective scream when something lunged out of the bushes, usually followed by frantic pointing, rock throwing, and the occasional self-sacrificing distraction from the bravest, or most unlucky, member of the clan. Survival demanded constant vigilance. Your eyes swept the tree line for unnatural shadows. Your ears strained for the sharp snap of a twig in the wrong direction. Every rustle could be a harmless breeze or something calculating your weight in calories. Living in groups was your best defense. More eyes meant a better chance of spotting trouble early, and if it came to it, a better chance of outrunning at least one other person. Cooperation was crucial, but so was self-preservation. The unspoken contract was simple. We watch each other's backs, but if a leopard grabs you, that's between you and the leopard. Some bands even developed unofficial lookout positions, though these were hardly enviable. Standing on a rock to watch for danger mostly meant you'd be the first one spotted by it. The single perk? If you saw trouble soon enough, you might get a few precious seconds head start. Thus, the prehistoric neighborhood watch ran entirely on unwilling volunteers. Unpaid, untrained, and occasionally eaten. No one signed up for the job. You were on duty from the instant your eyes opened to the instant they closed. Hopefully, the duty shift didn't last forever. Before language blossomed into the tangled web of grammar, nuance, and sarcasm we enjoy today, communication among early humans was stripped to the essentials. There was no long-winded explanation, no detailed storytelling, just a rough toolkit of pointing, grunting, and facial expressions that could mean anything from "look out" to "I think Barry's killing me." Pointing was the Swiss Army knife of prehistoric conversation. You could point at food, at a predator, or at something vaguely intriguing, though misinterpretation was practically guaranteed. Point at a distant gazelle, and others might think you were suggesting a hunt. Point at a nearby bush, and they might take it as "hide there," when you actually meant "avoid that," full of angry, stinging things. Grunts were equally multi-use. A long, low might mean "this food is good," or "I'm choking on this food." A quick, sharp could mean "danger ahead," or "that's mine." The only way to tell the difference was to watch the speaker's eyebrows and pray you got it right. Hand gestures tried to fill in the blanks, though accuracy was hit or miss. A wave could mean "come here" or "go away," depending on speed and context. Frantic arm flailing might signal "run," or "I'm on fire," or possibly "get this bug off me." This ambiguity kept things lively, and occasionally fatal. When things turned truly urgent, there was one universal signal: the scream. A scream meant something bad was happening right now. Whether it was a leopard, a rock slide, or a fresh wasp nest underfoot, the response was the same. Everyone screamed, and everyone ran. The details could be worked out later, assuming anyone was still alive to discuss them. The lack of a spoken language also made social life interesting. Food negotiations resembled silent staring contests. Courtship was a subtle dance of lingering eye contact, awkward throat noises, and, if you were feeling particularly bold, the presentation of a slightly bruised piece of fruit. Arguments could go from low grunts to full-on shoving in seconds, usually ending when one person stomped off to sulk behind a tree. Crude? Yes. Effective? Also yes. With nothing more than noise, hand gestures, and frantic pointing, early humans managed to warn each other of danger, coordinate hunts, and, most importantly, deliver the occasional insult. And honestly, what more do you really need for a functioning society? On paper, hunting sounded straightforward. Find animal, kill animal, eat animal. In reality, it was more like spot animal, spook animal, chase animal, collapse from exhaustion, and hope the animal tripped before you did. Weapons were basic: rocks, sticks, and the odd sharpened bone, none of which came with safety instructions, and all of which could wound you as easily as the target. Throwing a rock worked, if you were close enough to touch the animal with your other hand. Otherwise, it was little more than a polite suggestion that the prey run faster. The hunt began with spotting a target. Gazelles, antelope, and small deer were prime choices, not because they were easy, but because the meat was worth the effort. The catch? They could vanish over the horizon in the time it took you to blink. Success meant turning the chase into a group effort. The fastest runners pushed the animal toward others positioned ahead. Positioned ahead was a generous description. It usually meant standing somewhere vaguely in the animal's possible path and hoping luck handled the rest. Unfortunately, prey had a frustrating habit of running farther, faster, and in more unpredictable patterns than any human liked, often through terrain that made you question why you'd left your sleeping spot in the first place. When going after smaller targets like rabbits or lizards, the strategy was stealth. You'd flatten yourself to the ground, crawling forward so slowly that plants seemed to sprout around you. The payoff was a sudden burst of speed, ideally yours, and a grab before your target vanished into a hole far too small for you to follow. Not every hunt ended with meat over the fire, or, more realistically, raw in your hands. Sometimes you came back with nothing but bruises, empty hands, and a "you won't believe how close I was" story. Other times, the roles reversed, and you realized mid-chase that you were now the prey. Chasing a wild boar was less a hunting tactic and more an introduction to its tusks. Still, even a small win, a rabbit, a bird, anything with meat, could keep the group fed for the day, making the sore legs and bruises worth it. Fail, and you'd be back to foraging, hoping you remembered which berries didn't make your vision spin. If hunting was the prehistoric version of an extreme sport, gathering was the Stone Age desk job, safe, steady, and occasionally mind-numbing. You weren't going to take down a mammoth, but you also weren't going to get trampled, mauled, or stabbed by antlers. The worst outcome was an itchy rash, unless you misjudged a mushroom, in which case the rest of your day was going to be very colorful or very final. Gathering was usually done by those who preferred not to sprint after animals that actively disliked being caught. The method was simple. Wander until you spotted something edible looking, then hope your instincts or someone else's past experience proved it wouldn't kill you. Nature was full of mixed signals. Brightly colored plants were suspicious, foul-smelling plants were suspicious, and plants that looked too delicious? Definitely suspicious. Berries were the easiest find. If they were sweet, you ate them on the spot. If they were bitter, you still ate them. Prehistoric hunger wasn't picky. Tubers and roots were another option, though unearthing them required saint-level patience and fingernails that could double as chisels. Nuts were the jackpot, calorie-rich and satisfying, if you could open them without turning the attempt into a self-administered dental exam. Seeds and leafy greens filled in the gaps, though no one in history ever looked thrilled while chewing raw
Every so
foliage.
often,
Luck would lead you straight to honey, a prehistoric jackpot of sugar and energy. The problem was, bees had been around just as long as humans, and their customer service policy was simple: no sharing, ever. And while gathering was safer than chasing animals with weapons, it wasn't without its hazards. Snakes liked to nap in berry bushes. Wild pigs had strong opinions about humans raiding their snack stash. And occasionally, another band of humans would stroll past, glance at your basket, and decide their hunger outweighed your claim. Still, gathering had its benefits. You could grunt small talk with your fellow foragers, watch over the kids, and avoid the cardio nightmare of chasing something with horns. Best of all, on the days the hunters returned empty-handed, your pile of roots and berries instantly became the feast of the day. In the grand survival blueprint, gathering was never flashy, but it was steady. And in a world where steady often meant the difference between living and not, gatherers were the tribe's quiet heroes. When it came to shelter, prehistoric life wasn't about comfort. It was about living long enough to complain about the lack of it. Home could mean a shallow cave, a hollow tree, or even a boulder big enough to pretend was a wall. Caves were prime real estate, shady, dry, and already half-built. The only hitch? They were often occupied by something with more teeth and less patience than you. Eviction attempts were a mix of shouting, stick-waving, and quick retreats when the current resident failed to leave. If caves were taken, rock overhangs or hollow logs were the next best thing. They didn't offer much in the way of security, but they beat sleeping in the open, where the only roof was a bird occasionally dropping unsolicited gifts. The truly desperate option was building your own shelter. This involved piling branches, leaves, and mud into something vaguely resembling a tent. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't waterproof, but it gave the satisfying illusion of safety. Of course, if the wind picked up, you might wake to find your roof in the next valley. Location was just as important as construction. Too close to a river meant flooding, or worse, a crocodile knocking at your door. Too high on a hill gave you better drainage, but left you exposed to howling winds and zero hiding spots when danger showed up. In short, shelter was always a trade-off, and usually one you didn't get to think about for very long. Hunting a wild boar wasn't so much about the thrill as it was about avoiding becoming acquainted with its tusks at high speed. But for those brave enough, a single successful catch could feed the whole clan for the day, making the aching muscles worth it. Fail, however, and you'd be stuck chewing on berries, provided you hadn't already discovered which ones doubled as poison. If hunting was a dangerous gamble with big rewards, gathering was the prehistoric version of punching a time card at the world's least exciting office. You wouldn't bag a mammoth, but you were also less likely to get gored, trampled, or mauled. Worst case, an itchy rash, unless you grabbed the wrong mushrooms, in which case you'd be seeing swirling patterns for hours, assuming you survived the trip. Gathering wasn't just safer, it was social. You could grunt with your friends, keep an eye on the kids, and avoid chasing furious wildlife. The method was simple. Wander until you spotted something edible and hope your instincts or someone else's previous bad decision proved it wouldn't kill you. Bright colors? Suspicious. Foul smell? Suspicious. Too delicious looking? Definitely suspicious. Nature loved a cruel joke. Berries were a regular win. If they were sweet, you ate them on the spot. If they were bitter, you probably still ate them, because prehistoric hunger wasn't picky. Roots and tubers were filling but required saint-level patience to dig up. Nuts were the jackpot of calories, though without tools, opening them often turned into a dental hazard. And seeds or edible leaves? They filled the gaps, though no one ever got excited about chewing raw foliage. Once in a while, the jackpot wasn't nuts but honey, liquid treasure in a world without sugar. Unfortunately, bees had been around far longer than humans and weren't into sharing. Even so, gathering wasn't risk-free. Snakes liked to hide in berry bushes. Wild pigs didn't appreciate humans stealing their snacks. And occasionally, another group of humans would decide your full basket looked better in their hands. But when hunters returned empty-handed, the gatherers instantly became the heroes of dinner, even if it was just a pile of roots and berries. Shelter, meanwhile, was less about comfort and more about staying alive long enough to complain about the lack of it. Home could mean a cave, the hollow of a tree, or just a boulder big enough to crouch behind and pretend was a wall. Caves were prime real estate, shady, dry, and conveniently pre-built. The catch? They were often occupied by something with more teeth than you, and the eviction process involved yelling, waving sticks, and retreating when the current tenant disagreed. If caves weren't available, overhangs and hollow trees made decent backups, offering some cover from weather and only occasional gifts from overhead birds. For the truly desperate, there was DIY architecture, stacking branches, leaves, and mud into something vaguely resembling a tent. It wasn't pretty, and definitely not waterproof, but it gave the comforting illusion of safety. Placement was tricky. Near a river meant flood risk or nighttime crocodile visits. On a hill gave good drainage but left you exposed to wind, and gave predators a perfect view of dinner. Inside, furniture was whatever didn't poke, bite, or give you a sprain. Piles of grass were fine if you didn't mind bugs moving in. Flat rocks doubled as chairs, tables, and weapons. Lighting was provided by the sun, or if you were unlucky and still awake, the moon. Prehistoric homes were never about luxury. They were about putting something between you and the weather and praying it didn't collapse or bite you in the night. And then there was fire, the Stone Age's version of a smartphone. Once you had it, you couldn't imagine life without it. Lose it, and panic set in instantly. You couldn't just turn it back on. You had to steal it from nature, nurture it, and guard it like it was your favorite child. Often, fire arrived after lightning turned a tree into a torch, and the bravest, or dumbest, would dash in to grab a flaming branch, usually followed by running, yelling, and trying not to catch fire yourself. Keeping it alive became priority number one. Until someone discovered the stick-rubbing trick, making new fire was almost impossible. It had to be fed, sheltered from rain, and kept away from clumsy feet. But the payoff was massive. Cooked food that was tastier and safer, warmth on freezing nights, and a glowing deterrent to predators. Still, fire had its temper. Get too close and you'd learn pain firsthand. Forget to watch it and you could torch your entire camp, your dinner, and your eyebrows in one go. In the ancient world, fire wasn't just a tool. It was the VIP guest everyone wanted at their gathering. It was warmth, light, and dinner all rolled into one flickering miracle. People didn't just sit around it, they orbited it like moths, eating, gossiping, and staring at it as though it were a living god that occasionally spat out sparks. Whoever kept the flames alive held the tribe's comfort, safety, and cooking rights in their hands. And if that fire died on your watch, the quickest survival tactic was probably sprinting in the opposite direction before anyone noticed. Back then, predators weren't background scenery for documentaries. They were the uninvited neighbors who sometimes stopped by to see if you were on the menu. There were no fences, no tranquilizer darts, and definitely no call for help buttons. Staying alive meant knowing exactly which animals wanted to eat you and how to convince them you'd taste terrible. Top of the please don't eat me list, big cats, smooth, silent, and faster than your legs could ever dream of being. Their idea of a warning sign was usually someone else's scream. Hyenas weren't far behind, rolling in with their bone-crunching jaws and that unnerving laugh that made you wonder if the joke was you. Crocodiles, meanwhile, played the long game, literally, lounging in rivers like oversized driftwood until they exploded into motion, dragging anything unlucky enough to come close into a spinning nightmare. Then came snakes, some poisonous, some fond of giving you the world's deadliest hug, and all perfectly placed in spots you'd rather not step. Even the skies weren't safe. Giant prehistoric birds could swoop down and make off with smaller humans, leaving everyone else to share an awkward silence over dinner that night. Avoiding these threats wasn't a once-in-a-while thing. It was a constant occupation. You learned to read the wind, listen for the kind of silence that felt wrong, and accept that if you couldn't see danger, it was probably standing right behind you. Sleeping in groups helped, though it also increased the odds of being rudely woken up by someone screaming at shadows. When running wasn't an option, sometimes the only plan was bluffing, throwing rocks, yelling, and waving sticks to look bigger than you were. In a crowd, this could work. Alone? Well, let's just say it made for a very dramatic final performance. Over time, humans became masters of pattern spotting. You learned which rivers were just water and which ones were crocodile waiting rooms, which bushes were harmless, and which were basically snake dispensers, which trees you could actually climb in an emergency, and which would betray you halfway up with a rotten branch. Survival wasn't always about fighting. Most of the time, it was about perfecting the art of not being where danger was. And when all else failed, there was one golden rule. You didn't have to outrun the predator. You just had to outrun the slowest person in your group. Harsh? Absolutely. But in the prehistoric world, ethics had a funny way of vanishing when something was growling in the dark. Parenting back then didn't involve bedtime stories, spelling tests, or soccer practice. It was a full-time crash course in how to keep your kid alive until they can keep themselves alive. That was the entire curriculum. Step 1. Make sure your child's natural instinct to be as loud as possible didn't get everyone eaten. Prehistoric babies were walking, crawling, megaphones. They could advertise your position to predators from half a mile away. Pacifiers weren't a thing. Cribs didn't exist. Your only strategy was to carry them everywhere and glare hard enough to maybe convince them to stop screaming. Of course, carrying them wasn't the easy part. There were no strollers, no baby slings, no adjustable straps. You had two options: your own aching arms or, if you were lucky, a strip of animal hide to tie them to your back. This turned every daily task into a balancing act. Gathering food? You did it with an extra 10 pounds squirming on your spine. Climbing a tree to dodge a leopard? Now it was a leopard chase plus an unwilling passenger. Basically, prehistoric parenting meant living every day as a two-player survival game, where one player had no idea what was going on,